The final rescue auction of the season was nearly over. In a small livestock barn tucked deep in the Colorado foothills, the last few attendees lingered, boots scuffing against straw-covered floors. Most of the dogs had already been taken home, tails wagging, papers signed. What remained was silence. And one cage, pushed to the far edge of the barn. Inside it stood Bruno. He was a German shepherd, but barely recognizable. His ribs jutted through a patchy, sunken coat. One ear hung limp. A long scar ran across his flank. But his stance, rigid, alert, held a charge that warned people to keep their distance. He didn't bark. He didn't cower. He watched. Next and final animal, the auctioneer called out, tapping his clipboard. Male German shepherd, found tied behind an abandoned mill, severely underweight, reactive, especially with men. Starting bid, $1. Bruno's ears twitched at the word men. As a tall male volunteer stepped within a few feet of the cage, Bruno lunged. Hard. His snarl cracked the air and the bars rattled with the impact. Gasps spread across the barn. That one nearly took a chunk out of someone whispered. He's a liability. The auctioneer cleared his throat and waited. No one raised a hand. Until $1. Heads turned. Near the edge of the ring stood a girl, small and still, no more than 11. At her side was a woman, her mother, who laid a calm hand on her shoulder. You sure, young lady? The auctioneer asked, raising an eyebrow. The girl didn't blink. Yes, I want him. A few chuckles. One scoffed, she'll regret that. But the auctioneer shrugged. Sold, $1. And so the final bid went, not to someone seeking a perfect dog, but to a girl who saw something broken and believed it still mattered. Ellie Carter was quiet by nature. At 11, she had already known loss. Her father had died when she was 7, and though no one said it outright, Ellie had never really spoken the same way since. She listened more than she talked. She noticed things others overlooked, like silence, like sadness. When she looked at Bruno, she didn't see danger, she saw pain. He wasn't baring his teeth to scare them, he was building a wall, just like she once had. Samantha, her mother, stood beside her, concern written across her face. As a part-time behaviorist, Samantha had seen troubled animals, but Bruno was different, wound tight, on edge, unpredictable. Samantha glanced down. Ellie, you know this won't be easy. Ellie's eyes didn't waver. I know, she said softly, and I also know he's hurt. And he's craving love, just like I was. The words landed between them like something sacred. For a moment, everything else faded. The whispers, the warnings, the weight of paperwork. Bruno, still inside his crate, lifted his head. His eyes met Ellie's. It wasn't a long stare, just a second, maybe two. But something shifted in the space between them. He didn't see fear in her. He saw gentleness. He saw another wounded soul. He saw something he hadn't seen in a long, long time. Someone who wasn't afraid to see him. And inside that scarred, coiled body, something responded. Not trust, not yet, but a loosening, a breath, a tiny flicker of surrender. Ellie slowly lowered her hand toward the crate's bars. Samantha inhaled sharply, instinctively stepping forward, then froze. Because Bruno moved. Not fast, not aggressive, just forward. He pressed his head gently against Ellie's small hand. And in the hushed stillness of the barn, people watched with widened eyes, silent, stunned. He's not mean, Ellie whispered. He's just sad. Paperwork was signed quickly, but no one left in a hurry. People lingered by the barn entrance, stealing glances at the girl and the dog who had just rewritten the ending of an auction no one expected to matter. As Bruno's crate was wheeled toward the parking lot, he didn't growl again. He didn't bark or lunge, but his eyes never left Ellie. Samantha kept a careful pace, eyes flicking between her daughter and the animal who now belonged to them. She had spent years studying behavior, body language, micro-reactions, and Bruno's posture had changed. Not by much, but just enough for her to know this wasn't nothing. He was still tense, still guarded. But something had shifted. "Is following her," she whispered to herself. Not the food, not the leash, her. By the time they reached the SUV, Bruno hesitated. He sniffed the open space in the back where they had removed the crate door and lined it with soft bedding. It was a space designed not to contain him but to invite him. Still, he didn't move. Ellie didn't urge him. She simply crouched beside the car, staying low, her hands in her lap. No words, no commands, just presence. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, Bruno stepped forward. His limbs moved stiffly, worn from months of tension and neglect. Each step revealed how thin he truly was, how much of him had been worn down, inside and out. His paws trembled slightly as he climbed in, not from fear, but from sheer exhaustion. It wasn't graceful. He ducked his head, moved slow, each paw a negotiation, but he entered. Ellie gently closed the hatch. She didn't smile, didn't cheer, just placed her palm against the window and whispered, "You won't be alone anymore." Behind them, a volunteer who had warned them earlier shook his head in disbelief. "That dog's different already." Samantha looked at her daughter, then at the German Shepherd now curled in the back. "Maybe," she said softly, "because someone finally believed he could be." That drive home was quiet. No music, no words, only the sound of snow under tires and a dog's steady breath behind them. But it felt like something had begun. Their house sat on the edge of a quiet road, a small farmhouse tucked between open fields and a line of pines. Peaceful, still. It was the kind of place meant for healing, but Bruno didn't know that yet. The first few days were fragile. He refused to eat if anyone was in the room. He didn't sleep, not really. He would lie down, but always with one eye half open, his ears twitching at every creak of the floor or flicker of shadow. Even gentle noises, water running, a door hinge, made him flinch. He barely moved from the corner they had made for him, a crate without a door, surrounded by soft blankets tucked beside the fireplace. A safe space, but not yet a trusted one. Samantha tried to stay distant, but every time she walked through the room, Bruno would tense, sometimes growl low. It wasn't rage, it was memory, of hands too strong, of voices too loud. Dark clothing seemed to make it worse. Ellie noticed, so she began to tiptoe through the mornings, placing Bruno's food gently by his crate, then backing away. Beside each bowl, she left a little note, drawings of trees, suns, hearts. "So he knows he's not alone," she told her mother. She didn't try to pet him, didn't call his name. TJ just sat sometimes, cross-legged on the other side of the room, scribbling in her sketch pad, humming under her breath. Bruno never looked directly at her, but he didn't turn away either. And in a house full of quiet, that was something. Each evening, Samantha watched them from the kitchen doorway. No words passed between girl and dog, just time and stillness. And slowly, very slowly, Bruno began to eat while they stayed in the room. Not close, but close enough. By the end of the second week, Bruno had begun to shed the weight of fear. The growls had faded. The tension in his shoulders loosened. His eyes still scanned every room before entering, but they no longer held the wild, cornered look of something waiting to be hurt. He had begun to exist, not just survive. He would now eat with them nearby. He even lay within a few feet of Ellie when she sketched, his ears flicking at the sound of pencil on paper, but never moving away. Trust was blooming in silence. Then, one evening, something subtle but extraordinary happened. The fire crackled softly in the living room. Samantha read a book under warm light. Upstairs, Ellie had just settled in for the night. Bruno stood up from his blanket. He didn't pace like he once did. He walked slowly toward the back of the house, paused at the door, then circled once, uncertain. Samantha didn't move. A quiet sound on the stairs, Ellie descending. She didn't speak. She simply walked to the back door and opened it gently, sitting beside it with her knees pulled to her chest. Bruno turned to her. Their eyes met, briefly. Something passed between them, too quiet for words. And then, for the first time, Bruno walked out into the night, not driven by panic, but drawn by calm. The air outside was cold, and the sky hung quietly above him, scattered with stars. Bruno stepped onto the grass and paused, his breath visible in the chill. In that stillness, something long buried stirred deep within. A faint echo of belonging, a half-remembered feeling of once being safe, of having been loved. For a moment, the night wrapped around him like a memory. Then came something else, subtle but undeniable. That same feeling, no longer from the past, but alive in the present. This time, it came not from a distant place, but from behind him, from the girl and the woman who had waited without forcing, without fear. It was love again, only now it was steady. It was warm. It was real. Moonlight poured across the yard as he wandered, nose to the breeze. Ellie stayed seated, unmoving. Minutes later, Bruno returned to the doorway. He didn't look unsure, he didn't hesitate. He stepped back inside. Ellie smiled, just barely. "He's learning that needing someone isn't weakness," she whispered. And in that moment, under a quiet roof, trust didn't come in thunder. It came in a step. It happened on a wind-stirred Saturday. The house creaked as gusts brushed the windows. Ellie sat on the living room rug, coloring a picture of Bruno beneath a snowy tree. Samantha hummed softly in the kitchen, the scent of roasted carrots and rosemary filling the air. Bruno lay near the front door, not sleeping, but resting. Then, gravel crunching. A delivery truck pulled into the long dirt drive, tires crackling like dry leaves. Bruno's ears twitched. Ellie paused her coloring. 3 sharp knocks. The sound hit like a gunshot in Bruno's mind. He was on his feet before anyone could blink. Body tense, teeth bared, hackles high. A deep, guttural growl rumbled through his chest. The door handle turned. The man outside stepped forward. And Bruno lost control. The old fear, the pain, the instinct to survive. They surged back all at once. He lunged toward the door with force, snarling, barking, ready to attack the shadow on the other side. The delivery man stumbled back, eyes wide in panic. Across the room, Ellie froze. In that moment, something inside her cracked. She could feel it, like watching the trust she had tried so hard to build crumble in front of her. The love she poured into Bruno, the hope she clung to. It all felt like it was slipping away. Her throat tightened. "Bruno," she whispered, her voice barely holding. "Please don't, please." He froze. His body trembled. The growl faded but lingered in his throat. He turned slowly. Ellie stood a few feet behind him, her hands slightly raised, not in command, but in plea. Her eyes met his, full of sadness, not fear. A quiet disappointment lived there too, and something else. Hurt. His breath hitched. He stepped back from the door. Then he turned fully and walked toward Ellie, slow and unsure, his head lowered. His tail, no longer raised, swayed gently. He stopped at her feet, pressed his nose against her hand, then rested his head against her knee. Ellie said nothing. She didn't move. She simply let him stay. And in that silence, Bruno found something stronger than fear. Forgiveness. The snow had fallen overnight like a lullaby, slow, gentle, and complete. By morning, the world outside the farmhouse was silent and white. Trees stood bowed in reverence beneath the weight. Fence posts wore soft crowns of frost. The air held that particular hush only winter knows. Ellie had caught a cold the day before and stayed home, bundled beneath quilts, cheeks flushed, sketchpad resting on her knees. Samantha kissed her forehead and whispered, "We won't be long." It was just her and Bruno that morning, just the two of them, alone in the hush of a sleeping forest. They walked the trail slowly. Bruno's paws crunched softly in the snow, his breath rising in little puffs. For a while, it was peaceful, easy. Samantha even smiled as she unclipped the leash, letting him roam free for a moment. Then, he stopped. Bruno's body turned to stone, his head lifted, ears high, and his nose cut sharply into the wind. Something was wrong. In the next heartbeat, he was gone, sprinting into the trees, silent as a shadow. "Bruno!" Samantha called after him, heart leaping into her throat. She ran. Branches whipped her face. Her boots slipped on roots hidden beneath snow. And then she heard it. A bark. Violent, urgent, repeating. Her chest tightened. The sound was raw, wild. For a terrible moment, she was back at the shelter, back to snarls and cages, back to the warning signs. She stumbled into a clearing and froze. Bruno was there, facing a shape in the snow, not attacking, alerting. A young man lay collapsed in the drift, lips blue, one leg twisted horribly. He was barely breathing, and Bruno was standing over him, barking, warning, calling for help. Tears welled in Samantha's eyes as she dropped to the man's side, her hands already dialing. Even when the rescue team arrived, strangers, Bruno didn't run. He didn't lash out. He stayed by her side. Later that night, as Samantha told the story by the fire, Ellie listened in silence. Then she looked down at her newest drawing, Bruno under a snowy pine, standing guard. "He didn't just change," she whispered. A pause. "He chose to." It had been months since Bruno came home, since the growling, the flinching, the silence, since that cold day when he first rested his head in Ellie's lap. And now the barn doors opened again, not for an auction, but for something quieter, a gathering. Ellie had been invited back to the same place where she first saw him, where she had raised her hand for a dog no one wanted and paid just $1. The organizers were holding a community event on animal welfare and asked if the little girl with the quiet voice might be willing to share what came after. So here she was, standing just inside the same dusty barn. Samantha stood off to the side, watching as Ellie held Bruno's leash in one hand, a stack of her drawings in the other. Bruno walked beside her with ease. No pulling, no tension, only calm. People whispered when they saw him. "That's him?" someone murmured. "The shepherd from the auction." Ellie walked to the front of the barn. Bruno sat at her feet. She looked out at the crowd, adults, children, families, then down at her sketch pad. "I didn't know how to fix him," she said quietly. "I just knew he was sad. And I was too." Her voice didn't waver. Amy said he was dangerous, but I saw someone who was scared. I didn't want to change him. I wanted him to feel safe being exactly who he was. She held up a drawing. Bruno curled beneath a tree, eyes wide, anxious. "I drew this in the early days," she said, "when he didn't trust anyone, when every sound made him flinch. But even then, I knew he was trying." Bruno stretched out on the wooden floor, eyes half-lidded, body relaxed. From near the back, an older woman stood up. She had been there at that first auction, watched Bruno snarl and tremble, and warned Ellie not to waste her time. Now, she stepped forward, voice low and rough. "I told her not to do it," the woman said. "I thought, some dogs don't come back." She looked at Ellie, then at Bruno. But she didn't try to fix him. She gave him space. And time. A long pause. And somehow, he came back on his own. Bruno stirred slightly, shifting closer to Ellie's leg. But the barn was silent. Ellie didn't speak. She just smiled, small, steady, and let her hand rest gently on his back. And Bruno stayed. Not because he was told, but because for the first time in his life, he didn't need to run. Most people wouldn't look twice at a limping, dirt-covered dog tied to a post behind a crumbling barn. But 8-year-old Emma did. She didn't see a problem. She saw a soul waiting to be saved. What started as a quiet act of kindness would unravel a truth no one expected and lead to one of the most emotional rescues her small town would ever witness. This is the story of a little girl, a forgotten dog, and the $5 that changed everything. Emma was 8 years old the day she found Max. She had always said, "Someday I'm going to find a friend who'll never leave me." It was the kind of quiet dream kids say out loud and adults smile at, never expecting it to come true. But for Emma, that day came sooner than anyone thought. She lived with her grandparents in a quiet farming town, the kind with one grocery store, a post office, and neighbors who waved from their porches. Her grandfather, Mr. Dalton, a retired woodworker with gentle eyes and calloused hands, often brought her along on errands. One warm afternoon, they visited an old ranch on the edge of town to collect leftover lumber. While Mr. Dalton loaded the truck, Emma wandered toward a collapsed barn. Something moved in the shadows. There, lying in a patch of straw and mud, was a German shepherd. Thin, limping, scarred. His eyes, dull and tired, barely blinked. He was tied loosely to a post like he no longer mattered. Emma froze. Her heart clenched. She felt like she was looking at something that had been thrown away, not just a dog, but a life. His quiet suffering mirrored a loneliness she knew too well, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. A silent, desperate plea for someone to care. When she asked the rancher about the dog, he shrugged. Hurt himself, doesn't listen. You want him? $5. Emma looked up at her grandfather, her eyes searching his for an answer, as if asking silently, "Can I? Should I?" But before Mr. Dalton could say a word, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out exactly 5 crumpled dollar bills. Every cent she had. And that's how everything began. Emma's fingers trembled as she handed the 5 crumpled dollars to the rancher. It wasn't much, but it was everything to her. Saved from weekends helping her grandmother collect eggs, sweeping the porch, and returning bottles for change. The man didn't even look at her as he took the money. "He's your problem now," he muttered, turning back toward the barn. But to Emma, Max wasn't a problem. He was a promise. Mr. Dalton hesitated, watching his granddaughter kneel beside the injured dog. "Sweetheart, are you sure?" he asked gently. Emma nodded without looking up. "He needs someone," she whispered, placing a hand carefully on Max's shoulder. "And I think he chose me." Max didn't flinch. He didn't growl, he just looked up. Tired, unsure, but didn't pull away. That small act of trust was all Emma needed. With slow, cautious hands, Mr. Dalton untied the frayed rope from the post. Max stood on unsteady legs, his back paw barely touching the ground. He didn't bark or resist. He simply followed Emma step by step as she led him toward the truck. They drove home in silence. Emma sat in the back seat, gently resting her hand on Max's back. She didn't speak, but her heart was full. Somehow, she already knew this wasn't just about rescuing a dog. She wasn't just bringing Max home. She was bringing him back to life. When they arrived back at the farmhouse, the sun was already sinking behind the hills, casting long shadows over the yard. Emma didn't take Max into the house right away. Instead, she led him gently toward the old storage shed beside the barn, her secret place where she sometimes went to draw or hide from the world. That night, it became Max's refuge too. She laid out a nest of soft blankets on the floor, brought in a bowl of fresh water, and placed a clean dish with leftover roast chicken, his first real meal in who knows how long. Max sniffed it slowly, uncertain, before lowering his head to eat. Emma watched, not moving, afraid to break the moment. Afterward, she knelt beside him and stroked his back with slow, careful hands. His fur was coarse, matted in places, but beneath it she could feel the slight tremble of his ribs with every breath. "You're safe now, Max," she whispered. The name had come to her without thinking, just like everything else about him. And, as if he understood, Max let out the faintest sigh, not of pain, but of relief. The next few days were quiet. Max barely moved. He spent hours curled up, eyes open but distant. Loud sounds made him flinch. He didn't bark, didn't whine, just watched. His silence wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, the kind of quiet that comes from having been ignored for too long. But Emma didn't give up. Every morning, she tiptoed out to the shed before breakfast, a book tucked under one arm and half a sandwich in the other. She'd sit cross-legged beside Max, reading aloud in soft, careful tones. Fairy tales, farm stories, even old magazines. She tore the crust off her sandwich and gave him the soft middle, always placing it in the same spot. Then at night, before heading back in, she'd tuck her worn stuffed rabbit beside him, whispering, "He'll keep you company, okay?" Her grandparents watched from the window, worried but silent. They weren't sure if the dog would ever trust again. Emma never expected anything in return. She just stayed and waited because something inside her told her he needed time. And slowly, something began to shift. Max no longer flinched when she opened the door. His eyes started following her movements. He didn't move much, but there was something different. He was present. On the fifth evening, something changed. Emma was humming to herself softly as she brushed hay away from the corners of the shed, her little hands moving rhythmically, almost like a lullaby. The door stood open, letting in the orange glow of the setting sun. Max lay in his usual spot, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed, but watching her. And then, without warning, his tail twitched, just once. Emma froze. Her heart skipped. She blinked, wondering if she'd imagined it. But there it was again, a small, uncertain wag. Hesitant, like he wasn't sure if it was allowed. Emma didn't speak. She simply smiled, the kind of smile that fills a room without making a sound. She sat down beside him and gently brushed his fur, whispering stories about the school she didn't like, the cookies she'd baked that afternoon, and the dream she had last night where they both flew above the clouds. She didn't need him to talk. She just needed him to stay. From that evening on, Max began to shift. Barely, but enough for Emma to notice. He ate with a little more appetite. He sat up when she entered the shed. He no longer flinched when her grandfather's boots crunched on the gravel outside. That first tail wag wasn't just a gesture. It was a beginning. A flicker of something deeper than trust. A quiet answer to a little girl's faith that sometimes broken things still remember how to love. About a week after bringing Max home, Emma was sitting on the couch, curled up with a book, while Max rested nearby on the rug. The television murmured in the background. A documentary on military service dogs, something Mr. Dalton had stumbled across while flipping channels. As the sound of boots marching echoed from the screen, Max stiffened. Not a flinch, not a twitch. He snapped to attention. Ears up, back straight, eyes forward. It was like a switch had flipped inside him. He wasn't just alert, he was present, focused, ready. Mr. Dalton leaned forward, remote forgotten in his hand. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Emma looked up just in time to see Max holding his posture, still and silent like a soldier awaiting orders. The next morning, another moment caught them off guard. Emma accidentally knocked over a metal bucket in the yard. It hit the ground with a loud clang. Before she could even react, Max lunged forward and placed himself between her and the sound, low to the ground, eyes scanning, protective, instinctive. Later that afternoon, as a joke, Emma pointed her finger at Max and said, "Bang." To her surprise, Max immediately dropped to the ground, lying perfectly still, playing dead. Emma blinked in shock. "I didn't teach him that." From the porch, Mr. Dalton folded his arms, staring thoughtfully. "That dog's been trained," he said softly. "Not just tricks, real training." Emma looked at Max, now resting at her feet. Maybe he hadn't just been lost. Maybe he'd been trying to forget. And now, bit by bit, he was starting to remember who he used to be. It was the kind of afternoon that felt like summer had finally settled in for good. The sky was endless blue, Cicadas buzzed lazily in the trees. Emma was in the backyard, barefoot and carefree, twirling in the grass as she chased soap bubbles that shimmered like tiny rainbows in the sun. Max lay a few feet away under the old oak tree, watching. He always watched. Emma laughed as she ran, her dress fluttering. She bent down near the fence to pick a yellow wildflower, completely unaware of what was sliding silently through the grass just a few feet away. A snake. Long, dark. Its body moved in perfect silence, its head lifted slowly, tongue flicking, eyes locked on the warmth of the little girl kneeling nearby. It coiled tighter, ready to strike. Max saw it before anyone else did. He moved before he thought. A sudden, sharp bark tore through the air, loud enough to startle the birds from the trees. Emma turned in confusion, just in time to see Max charging toward her, eyes locked, muscles tense. He hit her hard, knocking her sideways into the grass just as the snake lunged. She screamed as she fell, landing with a thud, but unhurt. Max spun around and faced the snake head-on. He growled, low and furious. The snake struck, fast and unforgiving. Max yelped but didn't retreat. He lunged again, teeth clamping down on the serpent's body. He shook it with brutal force until it stopped moving. Then everything went quiet. Emma crawled toward him. "Max?" He turned to her, his tail giving a weak wag. But something was wrong. His legs wobbled. His breathing grew shallow. Blood oozed from a small puncture on his front leg. "Grandpa!" Emma screamed. Mr. Dalton came running, his eyes widening as he took in the scene, the dead snake, the trembling dog, his granddaughter safe but terrified. For a split second, he froze, overwhelmed by the weight of what could have happened. Then instinct kicked in. He dropped to his knees beside Max. "We have to get him help, now," he said, voice tight, "before it's too late." Emma ran beside him, tears streaming down her face, her hand never leaving Max's side. He had saved her without a second thought. Now she could only hope they weren't too late to save him. The old pickup truck roared to life, gravel flying as Mr. Dalton tore down the dusty road toward the town's veterinary clinic. Emma sat in the back seat, cradling Max's head in her lap, whispering to him through tears. "Hold on, Max. Please hold on." His breathing was shallow, his eyes flickering open every few seconds before slipping shut again. The puncture wound on his leg was swelling fast. Poison was working its way through his body, and every second mattered. Mr. Dalton kept glancing at them in the rearview mirror, jaw clenched, white-knuckling the steering wheel. He'd never driven that fast in years, but today, speed was the only thing he could give this brave animal that had given everything for his granddaughter. As they pulled up to the small brick clinic nestled between the feed store and the town bakery, the bell above the door hadn't even finished ringing before Dr. Reyes came out from the back. "Snake bite?" he asked, already kneeling by Max, examining his leg. "Yes, copperhead, I think," Mr. Dalton replied breathlessly. Dr. Reyes nodded. "Let's move. He's fading." They rushed Max into the back room. Emma tried to follow, but the vet gently stopped her. "You did the right thing bringing him here. Now let me try to keep him with us." Emma stood in the doorway, hugging her arms tight against her chest as her grandfather placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "He's strong, Em," Mr. Dalton whispered. "He's a fighter." Behind the swinging door, machines beeped and voices rose in urgent tones. Emma couldn't hear much, but she refused to leave. She had promised Max he was safe. Now, she had to believe someone could save him, just like he had saved her. Hours passed. The sun had long dipped below the trees by the time Dr. Reyes emerged from the back room, wiping his hands on a towel. Emma sat curled in one of the waiting room chairs, head resting against Mr. Dalton's arm, eyes red and swollen from crying. Dr. Reyes knelt in front of them with a tired smile. "He's stable," he said gently. "It was close, but he pulled through. That dog's got a will to live." Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Mr. Dalton exhaled too, relief softening his features. "I've seen a lot of dogs in my time," Dr. Reyes continued, "but there's something different about him." He looked down at his clipboard, hesitated, then stood. "Come with me." They followed him into the exam room. Max lay on a padded table, hooked up to an IV, but awake now, eyes alert, tail tapping slowly against the edge. When he saw Emma, he gave a soft grunt, as if to say, "Still here." Emma's heart swelled the moment their eyes met. Her fear melted into quiet joy. She walked over slowly, like she didn't want to break the moment, and knelt beside him. The corners of her lips trembled into a smile as she whispered, "Hi, buddy." It felt like seeing the sun come back after a long, terrible storm. Dr. Reyes watched closely. "Earlier, when I was treating him, I noticed something. Scar tissue near the base of his neck. Felt like a chip under the skin." He pulled out a handheld scanner from a drawer and hovered it above the spot. A soft beep echoed in the quiet room. The screen lit up with a serial number and a name. K9 Unit Ranger 12. Status: missing, in action, presumed deceased. Emma's eyes widened. He was in the military? Dr. Reyes nodded slowly. Yes, a trained military working dog. 2 years ago, he was part of a transport unit that was attacked during an operation overseas. No one ever found him. They thought he didn't make it. Emma's hand tightened around Max's paw. Tears welled again, but this time they weren't from fear. "You were a hero before I ever met you," she whispered. "But now, you're mine." And Max, tired but safe, closed his eyes. Finally home. Max stayed at the clinic for 2 more days before Dr. Reyes gave the okay for him to go home. His leg was bandaged, his movements slower, but his eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, were full of life again. The moment they pulled into the driveway, Max perked up. His tail thumped against the truck bed. This wasn't just any place to him now. It was home. Emma had prepared everything for his return. New blankets in the shed, a big bowl of water, and even a handmade sign that read, "Max's spot, hero only." She couldn't stop smiling, and Max couldn't stop following her wherever she went. One evening, as the sky turned gold and the wind rustled gently through the fields, Emma sat with Max by her side, her hand resting on his back. She looked up at her grandfather. "I only gave $5, she said softly, "but it feels like he gave me everything." Mr. Dalton smiled, placing his hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes, sweetheart, the best things in life don't cost much at all." Max let out a soft sigh and nestled closer. And in that quiet moment, beneath a setting sun, the world stood still for just a breath, long enough to remember that sometimes it's the broken who teach us how to be whole again.